Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. It is Friday the 13th, 11 o'clock Central Texas time, and we are back with Right Side Up in honor of Steve Staggs. It is episode 69, and I'm going to tell you, you're in for a treat. You know, it's amazing because we've done 37 episodes. So, Steve and I did 37 episodes, about 2 hours apiece. This is a ton of content. If you're interested in seeing any of those, it's in a playlist on the channel and it's in podcast form as well if you just want to listen. But what's really cool about that is we also have a tool. If you go to stevestaggs.com, my buddy Ray, ZZ Tesco, as you might know him, he built this tool where you can type in any word and it'll find it in all the videos and then it'll go right to that spot in the video. And that's what I use now to literally go through content based on kind of what's been happening during the week. And this is a big shout out to my buddy Jim today, kind of a dedication to him, because what's amazing is, when you start thinking with Jesus, right? This idea that Steve always said to me, he said, Matt, it becomes like breathing. And I'm like, what does that mean? How does that work? And of course, it comes down to intent and interest. And we talk about this all the time. What is your interest and what is your intent? And it's like, well, I want to learn to hear from you. Help me, teach me how to hear from you. And, I was having a great conversation because just amazing things are happening. Like, this is the fullness of time. Like, things are happening. And folks, if you're just kind of crypto, looking in from the crypto world, I mean, everything's changing in the world, right? We may be on the edge of World War III. It's crazy what's going on. However, the Lord Jesus has just reassured me that he's got this too. And that's really the big point of doing this on Fridays, every Friday, 69 episodes, is we need the reminder, right? People go through so much. We all do. And it's nice to have someone just reminding you. And so my buddy Ray and my buddy Jim and all sorts of folks in my life are an encouragement to me. And I want to be an encouragement to you by helping you hear encouragement from Steve. But at the end of the day, this whole thing, what is it about? It's about basically encouraging you to go directly to the one who created everything, because he's alive and he speaks. And that's something that is really crazy. You think, well, is it possible that people would believe that just Jesus is dead? Well, the way they talk about him, kind of, right? I often say on Easter Sunday, everybody's like slapping you on the back going, brother, he is risen. Well, if he rose, he's still alive, folks. He's alive and he speaks. And I've just seen the practical evidence of that. And, I'm kind of a dumb guy. And I celebrated on September 10th, so 3 days ago, 24 years of following Jesus, seriously. And really, it was since meeting Steve that everything just kind of went in like this exponential form. And why? Because my buddy Steve Staggs, who I've got his my buddy Ray gave me this. This is his baseball card when he was with the Toronto Blue Jays. And that was a gift that Ray gave me. And I have it on my desk. And what's just so cool is just reminded, here's a guy who spent 40 years and he took all the discipline that he, since he was a kid, that he put into understanding the game of baseball, practicing the game of baseball, and took that discipline, which is very difficult. To go into the pros in any sport, folks, you have no idea. And I don't either, right? But I got that sense from Steve, and he applied that same discipline to literally his walk with Jesus. And he spent 40 years literally going, hey, how do you see this? And he's just, what's amazing in this clip that we're going to watch, which is just profound, really talks about that process. And I think it's a good reminder to those who are in that journey, but also understanding that there's a sovereign God who literally loves you, made you, created you, and there's purpose in this world. And it looks like everything, like the evil side will win. Everybody's on the edge of their seat going, what's going to happen? Which way is this going to go? And what's so great about this is, what? Jesus is out front. He says, I'm the good shepherd. Well, what does that mean? What's a shepherd? Well, a shepherd is out front and the sheep recognize his voice. And of course, the shepherd knows his sheep. And what's amazing about this idea of just simply following him is this engagement. And there's a battle for your thinking, your heart, and your mind. how you think about these things. Because, you can talk about Jesus in the past and you can talk about a glorious future in heaven, but we live in the present. What is the practical application of that if he's not alive and he doesn't speak? Well, is it just read your Bible? Well, no, that's very useful. But that's been revolutionary for me in the last 3 years, 2.5 years, is this idea that is the creator of the universe accessible? Literally, is he interested in your every inquiry? And I'm here to tell you, yes, it is the case. And I've experienced so many amazing things, and a couple people watching this know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's evidence. It's evidence. It's not like, Jesus appears, glowing. No, but he literally, shows you, okay, you fought the lion and the bear. I'm redeeming all of these things in your life. And it's just such an encouragement. And so I just want you to know, I'm really excited about this episode. I hope that it will be an encouragement to you. But I'm just reminded, deeply that Jesus is alive and he speaks and he's got this. And the enemy's approach to knocking you out of the game and getting you off center is fear. And if you're struggling with that stuff, I can relate with you and I share that with you. We got some folks like Mike Ostel. I mean, he's at the doctors, just, helping Peggy with issues at the hospital. He's dealing with his own health issues and he's been so consistent. And so I'm just going to encourage you to pray for Mike Ostel and Peggy. And just appreciate Mike. I mean, he texted me. He's like, man, I'm going to miss this. And I just so appreciate that. Sam Kemp, of course, always in the house. 41 people here already. And folks, what's so cool is if you're on YouTube, you probably only see a handful of people. The rest of these folks are coming in from X, Twitter, if you will, as well as Christians in Crypto. So if you're somebody on Twitter, I just want to welcome you here. We're going to get into the content. I want to say hello to my good friend Carter Hill. Thanks for being here, buddy. Let's jump in with our good friend Steve Staggs. He is accessible by you. But Taryn asks an amazing question that really relates to this. He says, what does one do when they ask Christ and the Heavenly Father questions and seemingly get silence in response? That happened to me last night. Literally last night, I was up late and I was trying to go to sleep and I'm just like, Jesus. And I was like, without exact questions, desiring for him to speak. And, we talked about this last time that the way he speaks isn't just audibly, right? Yeah. It's difficult to have a one-way conversation. And I would say this, Taryn, I agree with you 100%. And it is something that is the mystery of all of this. And I want to throw one thing into the mix here as you answer this question, Steve. There's something about this conversation that it's like, I look at all the things I read in the Bible. I look at all these stories to try to make sense of them and, ask Jesus, what do you mean by this stuff? And what I see is he uses a lot of people. And it seems like when we're interacting with people, in a way, we're doing something that he's kind of designed for us to do, like communicating in community with each other and examining these things rather than just being alone in a closet going, please speak to me. And if you don't speak audibly, you're not real. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's where oftentimes we struggle for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is the way we've been taught, both generally by society and more specifically how we've been taught. Those of us who have grown up in the church, been part of the Christian world, have, where the Bible is an important document in our lives. We have not been taught how this works, and yet it's so very, very simple. I don't know if Taryn has children, but I've had children, grandchildren. For those who have had children will understand this much easier. When you bring a little baby home from the hospital and you stick them in the crib or you put them in the chair and you start speaking to them, do they have a clue what you are saying?
Nope.
No. Is it their obligation to know that you're talking to them? No. It is our responsibility as parents to look in the face and in the eyes of the little one, to touch them, to speak to them. And the very first thing that they hear are not our words, but more our tone and our attitude toward them that transcends the words that we're speaking to them. There is, in other words, there is a higher level of communication that is occurring between us and our little newborn baby than just the exchange of English words. It's much bigger. It's way beyond what these words can transmit. And so that's the first thing that the baby comes to experience is the tone, is the attitude that's in the tone, the quietness of the words, see, the love that is in them. And the baby's not making all kinds of calculations about this. It is simply in an observation mode. Well, that's where we are with Jesus. Remember what he said? He said, unless you're willing to enter into my kingdom as one, like one of these little children, you can't enter in. Why? Because as adults, what we want to do is define how that works, as opposed to observing how it works and then passing that on to others. So what have I said in all of that? Taryn, the issue is, if you really want to hear Jesus, then let him take you into your learning process to learn to hear his voice, beginning with things that you don't recognize. You just put yourself in a position of observing.
Wow.
Jesus, I want to learn to hear your voice. How do you do that? How do you teach me? Wow. See? Now, here's the other part of that. Once you start that and you get yourself in an observation kind of mode, just like the little baby, right? They're looking up and going, who the heck are you up there? I have no idea who you are, but you sound really cool. I want to get to know you more. See? You'll start finding those kinds of things happening. And what Jesus does, and I'm going to give you a practical element of that in just a second. What he does is he then starts training the senses that he built in you to start recognizing things that you did not even know were there. Sensitivities, awarenesses, and eventually what will happen is you will actually start putting vocabulary to the things that you have observed and experienced with him. And that vocabulary is the result of him speaking. You're simply restating what you have heard from him. Not through a sequence of words, but through a mechanism of communication that is much bigger than what just the exchange of words do. Now, let's now talk for just a second about words. Words are not designed to transfer experience. It's like in our conversations, right? I'm not going to tell you that this is the end game. I'm going to tell you, I'm just going to introduce this to you. Why? Because why would there is no way that I could communicate the fullness of what Jesus has spoken, what his kingdom represents, how it's worked through a sequence of words. But what I can do is use those words to invite you to go to him to engage the same experience.
Whoa.
Okay? And he will bring you into a level of experience that no human vocabulary could ever accomplish. It can simply introduce and invite you in, but he's the guy that makes it happen. Well, why would I want to deprive anybody of that? See? So now let's connect that to this speaking dynamic. The limitation of words is that they cannot create experience. And until you learn to experience him speaking and communicating, no volume of words is going to mean anything to you. So begin at the beginning. Just simply, Jesus, I want to learn to hear your voice, to recognize when you speak to me, to know you alone. Jesus, will you do that for me? And then just observe and participate and cooperate with the process. And he will take you at a level that no human being could even begin to describe.
And and since 1982, you told me the other day, you said, and I loved it. It was a bit of a confession from you. You're like, Matt, you have to recognize it. Like, I pushed against this for 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, I love it because you're, somewhat self-deprecating in that process to say, hey, I kind of had a thick skull and all this stuff. And I had this journey. And what I appreciate so much is that, you've paid a lot of the dumb taxes. You're just like, yep, I've been the idiot here. And hopefully you don't have to do the same thing I did. But it's wonderful that you articulate it that way. And I've just never heard this stuff, Steve. Here's the thing, guys, that just resonates in my ear when I hear you say this. Here we are in crypto, and we're defending DeFi. I was on, there's a newspaper writer that called me, wanted to interview me about the Texan token. And he had absolutely he misunderstood. He didn't know crypto at all. He thought crypto was Sam Bankman-Fried and stealing people's money. And so I had to go back to the beginning, just what you did, right? You're like, you bring a baby home. And I said to him, what was Bitcoin created for and why was it created? And we talked about that, and he got this establishment. I said the purity of the reason and the core of why it was created, it's bastardized. And this is really kind of almost the same cycle that we see in life, is that people want to take the thing in its original creation and they want to add to it things that basically soup it up. They want to put a blower on it. They want to put, nitrous. And then they get all hopped up on leverage, and then they lose everybody's money because they want it now. They want it quickly. They want it. And there's something really, really beautiful, in my opinion, about the tool of the blockchain itself. It's decentralization is really fascinating because I think it actually has it has a connective tissue to the framework of God's creation. And when I see that Jesus walked on this earth for a purpose and then said, I'm out of here. And they're like, where are you going? He's like, I'm sending one who will remind you of everything I said. And what I love about that as it relates to crypto is this. We have choice to engage with a contract on the blockchain. We have a choice. And what I think is so amazing is it's like, well, I can describe the benefits, but I don't even have the words.
Yeah.
You have to taste and see that the Lord is good yourself, because we were talking before we started the stream and I was like, Steve, I saw a miracle, man. And you're like, well, that's awesome. And that's great. And that's super cool. But I can't even articulate to you. You can go, yeah, I've had a similar experience, but you can't experience the fullness of what I experienced. But you rejoice in it and you're like, yeah, that's awesome. I'm so happy for you. And you're super kind. But in a way, it was just for me at that moment and for those that it impacted. And I can share that with you. You can be like, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But I do want to say to everybody that's out there, and Taryn, thanks for being willing to even say that, because I think that a lot of times I feel like when I go into church, I got to sit down and shut up. Yeah. What I love about this is, these are the things, the challenges. When I was a kid, I got to tell you this story, Steve. So somebody told me I had to go to youth group, right, when I was a kid in Michigan. And it was supposedly going to be fun. And of course, there were girls there. And so I was, more inclined to go. And I'm probably in middle school, maybe 7th, 8th grade. And I didn't go to that church for very long. But they went on a canoe trip. And the lady who was leading the youth, I mean, she might have been 100, right? And of course, as a kid, you're like, anyone who's old is like really old. And she was not frail, but she was certainly no spring chicken. And she had these big old 80s glasses on, that probably had real glass in them. And the kids thought it'd be funny to tip over her canoe. Well, this woman, and you can't really touch the bottom. It's real mucky. And she was not interested in being tipped over. And I have to say, I was not one of the ones who tipped her over. But she literally, and imagine a woman in her 70s going over the side of a canoe, and she lost her glasses. And her glasses, heavy, thick glass, down 8 feet into muck. And she was freaking out because, she needed glasses to even see, her face in front of her and the kids. And she was upset. And I literally was like, I'm going to find those glasses, Steve. I'm a 7th grade kid. And I'm like, I'm finding those glasses. So I dove down multiple times and I grabbed a hold of those glasses and I brought them up. And I gave her those glasses and she goes, praise Jesus. And I said, what? Praise Matt. I'm the guy who dove down in the muck and got your glasses. So I'm a middle school kid going, what in the world are you crazy Christian people talking about? Jesus didn't fly in and dive down in the water and grab your glasses. Now, of course, knowing what I know now, it's a funny story to tell. But Taryn, I can relate to you in the sense that, when you start, getting into this thing where you're actually willing to go, I got nothing. I don't have the skills. I don't know how to listen. I'm making assumptions about you that likely aren't true. And this idea that we first drink milk as babies and then we eat meat. There's a progression to this whole thing. But the beauty of that is God is so gracious and patient with us in the process. And you said it to me yesterday or the other day. You said, all heaven rejoices. Can you speak to that as it relates to those who come to him and say, I want to know you. I want to hear you. I want to look at your face and observe you. And you said, all heaven rejoices. What did you mean? Because that, I had such joy from that comment.
Yeah, that was in the context of you making a declaration that your choice was to listen to Jesus and to do what he asked you to do only. That was the only voice that you were giving authority to speak to you and to direct your life. Now that was in the context, and I don't know if I'm sharing what I should be sharing, but since you raised it, I'm going to. But that was in response to you being concerned that you were actually hearing what Jesus was saying and doing what he wanted you to do. So it was giving opportunity for fear to inject itself into your attempts to learn how to live with Jesus and to hear him speak, and then to learn how to work with him as he's working.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what happens is we're all coming out of the same cesspool, and that cesspool is loaded with this thing called fear. So your good intentions to hear what Jesus was saying and learning how to do what he was doing was now being attacked, if you will, or trying to be neutralized through the injection of fear. And so the comment was, Matt, the question was, Matt, whose voice are you giving permission to speak to you? Tell me what it is. Who are you? Well, you didn't really understand the question at first, but no.
Yep.
Who are you giving permission to? You are an Elohim man who has authority to rule. Who are you giving permission to speak to you? Well, Jesus. Okay. Make that declaration. Establish that decree. Now, this is not fake stuff. This is how it works. Okay. And when you do that, guess what Jesus will do? I'll take you up on that, son. Let's do that. Now, what happens is that all of heaven is now in those moments is that it pauses to listen to the decree that Matt is issuing that is then inscribed into creation. And guess what? When that happens, heaven rejoices and says, there's another son of man right there. Wow. Let's go. Heaven and earth at that moment are joined through the son called Matt. And Jesus alone is the one who has authority to speak to him. Now, does that mean other elements, other voices aren't going to try to speak to you? No, it's just that they have no authority to affect you. Now, let's take the next step, right? In this conversation, since we're inviting folks into our conversations.
Yeah.
I said, okay, now here's the next step, Matt. You call fear to present itself to you, and you require it to stand in front of you. And then you say to fear, fear, what do you have to offer me? You have injected yourself into this situation. Tell me what you are bringing to the table. Tell me one thing of value that you are offering me. And require it to tell you. Guess what? It won't have anything to say. Back to Taryn. That's what silence sounds like. And then you dismiss it. Depart from my presence. You have no role or place here. Jesus alone is the one that has authority to speak to me. Depart.
Wow. Okay, so this should shatter your worldview in some respects. Texan Tailgate 4 says this: it's so nice to bring people together in the spirit and mind to converse these topics. Thank you for being in the trenches and discussing the death of religion. I really like that, Forrest, because in a way what we're doing and what I feel like my conversations with Steve have been peeling back these things that are kind of assumptions, right? They're kind of, it's like you got to go along with it. Because what I did when I became, when I had this conversion experience, September 10th of 2000, I just started devouring everything. Well, one of the things I thought I had to do was look around me and act like the people around me.
Yeah.
And the people around me had a culture, and that culture was not listening to the words of Jesus. It was a set of parameters, and it makes things easier when you're running a church to have kind of some rules.
Yeah.
And of course, you think about doctrine, you think about religious stuff. Well, what are my expectations when I go to your church? Well, there's a different way of everyone does it, right? There's a style to things. There's a perspective to things. And everyone gets kind of caught up on all of these things. And what's really interesting is, I go to church on Sunday and I can see these things now. I don't judge them. I don't like, oh, that's bad. What I say is, hold on a second. If I hear these things and they resonate with me as true, and I start understanding that we are creating and giving away our authority, if you will, but we're accepting the authority of Jesus in our life. We're basically saying, you're the boss. This really comes from a topic that we wanted to cover on this stream. And that's this idea of authority and naming rights. And I'm going to make this transition here. So the centurion, the story in the Bible, which I absolutely love, is this guy who's in the military. He comes to Jesus and he says, my daughter's sick. And what's funny about this one is Jesus is willing to go. He's willing to go and I'll go help heal, which is really amazing to me. Here's the Son of God in the flesh, and you say, "Hey, I need some help," and he's like, "Okay, I'll help you," and he says, "No, no, I'm a man under authority. If you just say it, it will be done." And what's amazing in that interaction is that Jesus is like pretty impressed with this. Like, hold on, you get it. Can you can you take us to this idea of authority and naming rights, and in this context weave together this idea of being under authority and whose you are, because that's what I think that you articulated to me was, Matt, that's how you say it, you're like, Matt, are you saying that you want to only do what you hear Jesus saying, and you want to follow what he says and where he directs you and guides you and do what he tells you to do? Well, there's no room for anything else. So the centurion's like, "Hey, dude, I know who you are." And I think I love it because for some people, Steve, like my dad, man, thick skull, he was self-deprecating, but he'd be like, "Yeah, I'm not a very smart guy." And what's amazing is Jesus got to him at 71.
Yeah.
He passed away at 73. And what's amazing is I was like, this is never going to happen. My dad's not going to come to know the Lord. And to see him have that experience and confess that is amazing. So anyway, I just dumped a bunch on you. What are the thoughts as far as authority and naming rights and how that is established and why we can give Jesus authority over our lives?
Yeah. It begins with understanding the vision that the Father had for creating. And we've kind of touched on this in the two previous sessions. And by the way, folks, virtually none of what I share with Matt and now as a result with you came out of study. Not one bit of it. As a matter of fact, all the studying I did had to be stripped away from me because it created an entirely wrong perception and perspective about the kingdom of God, about how Jesus operates, about what this is all about. So if you're wanting to study more, that is not the answer. Jesus is the one who will start to unlock this for you in a way that will totally blow your mind, not only in its massive majesty, but in its simplicity. It is so simple. It's mind-numbingly simple. Okay, so authority in the kingdom of God is given for the purpose to bless and protect.
Okay.
Now that is as simple. So now let's go back to the experience with you. Jesus, you alone have authority to speak to me. And Jesus says, great, I'll do that. Well, what has Jesus just accepted? The responsibility to bless and protect, to exercise the authority of all of heaven to bless and protect. Okay. Now there's a lot that goes in there, but let's, kind of start with that. Now, why is that important? Why were you able to grant that authority to Jesus instead of Jesus just taking it?
Interesting.
Okay. Well, same thing with the serpent in the garden. We think that the devil is so powerful, we could go down an entire, litany of questions about what we think about angels and what we think about the devil and all of that stuff. 99% of it's going to be wrong because that's how we've been taught. That's what Jesus has to strip away. If Satan was so powerful, why did he not just come into the garden and saying, dudes, I'm taking over. I'm the badass here.
Yeah.
I am the man. If you don't know who I am, you're about to find out. I'm taking over. Why didn't he do that? Why did he have to go through this convolution of exchanges with Eve to get her to agree to enter into a transaction with him in order for him to secure her authority? Wow. Because he doesn't possess authority. That's not what he has. He does not have the authority to rule. We have the authority to rule. Why is that important? Okay. Where does that come from? Well, that goes back into the Father's vision for creating. Has anybody ever asked you, why did the Father create? What did he have in mind? What was he thinking about? See, what was the end game that he had in mind? What, and how did he plan to get there? What was that all about? Well, Christianity has an answer, but the answer is absolutely makes no sense if you pause, take a step out of it, and just look at it and say, okay, I've got a contract in front of me. I think what I'm going to do is evaluate if this contract is actually saying what I think it says. Isn't that what you would do as a business guy? Isn't that what you do when you enter into a relationship, with a customer or with a partner, or even at the employment level? Don't you, reduce that to a contract of some form to make sure that both of you are on the same page?
Yep.
Well, we don't do that when it comes to why did God create? It makes no sense, what we are told, the reason that God created. So I asked him, I'm a business guy. I know what it is to build businesses and run businesses and stuff like that. Well, gee whiz, why don't I just try it? Father, why did you create? What was the vision that you had in mind when you created? Son, thank you for asking. Wow, thank you for asking. Can you imagine the God of all creation saying thank you? Well, that's kind of back to Taryn, that looking into the eyes and hearing the kindness of the voice that is really who is our greatest advocate. So the reason I created, my vision for creating was that my man would learn to rule my creation with me in the fullness of my nature and character. That is my vision. And if you learn to follow me, I'll teach you how to live that way. Okay?
Wow.
Well, guess what? In order to rule, I have to have authority, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm going to exercise authority, what is the purpose for that authority? To bless and protect. See? So that anything and everything that God entrusts to me, my authority is to be used for one reason alone, and that's to bless and protect. Okay? Wow, how do I do that? Good question. Follow me, I'll show you how to do that. I'll teach you how heaven rules. I'll teach you how heaven exercises its authority. By the way, isn't that what I responded to the disciple who asked me how to pray?
Yeah.
See, as in heaven, so also in the earth. These things are not separated, son. Heaven and earth are two parts of the same creative, component there. They're two sides of the same coin. Now, what happened is, that's why when the serpent entered the garden and entered into this transaction with Eve, that Adam then partnered in accepting, that at that point, authority was no longer about blessing and protecting. It was about ruling. And ruling over, in Christian terms, it's called lording over quite often, but it is to rule with heavy-handedness in order to create compliance. And at that moment, we returned from right side up to upside down. The authority that we were given to bless and protect was now going to be used to create a heavy-handed compliance model that put us under the heel of the one to whom our authority was given. Wow. Okay? And that's what we experienced.
Okay, so we gotta break this up. This is enormous. Okay, I'm gonna try to say it back to you here. This is amazing. See, every time I hear it, it's like it gets even better. What's amazing is one of the things I want to share with you. If you're somebody that grew up in the church, and I've had kind of these 22, 23 years of it. A lot of these things sometimes are a bit shocking to your system because it's. But here's the thing that I've experienced in spending time with Steve and listening for myself. I keep coming back to the fact that he always says, "Ask him yourself, dude. Don't trust me. Ask him yourself." So that's what I did. And I consulted with what I know about the Bible and what I know about all these things and these questions that Steve asks. And, he's like, "Hey, I asked him, why did you create?" And I think what's really fascinating about it is it's almost like I've been reading Christianity through an old black and white TV, and that somebody decided to put me in a theater and it's in Technicolor. When it goes in the, Wizard of Oz and it's like all black and white. And then it's like you go in, it's like, oh my goodness, hold on. I knew that there were probably some cool things here, but this is like way beyond, and it's wow, it's detailed, it's wider, and it's bigger, and it's amazing. So here's the thing. I feel like we have, especially in the stories that we tell each other within the church, kind of an accepted way of describing the fall of man. And we kind of just take other people's word for it rather than really looking at what is this, and then asking Jesus himself, reveal this. So when you said to me, hey, I asked him, and this is what he said. Well, if you look at, I did, I went and I looked at all the different things Jesus said, and it's like, hold on a second. This is exactly what he said. He said, on earth as it is in heaven. And, all of these things that reinforce the fact that listen to Jesus, everything, like, it's amazing. Like how much, twice that I can think of in the Bible, the actual God spoke and said, this is my son with whom I'm well pleased, listen to him. And I'm like, okay. So I'm going to start listening. And what's amazing about what you just said is that I loved it when you don't have authority, you think about, just look at any situation in which somebody's been given authority. And I keep going back to the prodigal son. I keep coming back to Mordecai. Oh my gosh, Mordecai is a perfect example of this. And Esther is that Artaxerxes gave him a ring, and he could not decree anything in the kingdom without that ring. And it's this picture of a signet ring. And I wear this signet ring. What is the signature? Well, it's authority. And this idea that the impression is making something official. And to think that prior to the serpent confusing Eve and tricking her, if you will, before even Eve showed up on the scene, here's Adam being given authority to name the animals. And I think what's amazing is he gets in the progression of that story is so wonderful, because he's like, where's my version? Right? He's like, I see these, male and female of these things. We're naming these things. He's saying, let's practice this authority I've given you. I created it and it's very good. And I've given you this authority to bless and protect these things, right? What's amazing to me, and it becomes Technicolor, is this vision I have in my mind of what is it like when this crafty one, right? The snake, this serpent, right? And it even establishes in that story that the serpent was one of the most crafty animals the Lord God had made. So that's a whole other thing that we've talked about in the past, this idea that, hold on a second, this wasn't a surprise to God that this crafty serpent came in here and lied to you. But what really blew my mind this last week was the fact that what I've kind of glossed over as the fall of man is actually a transaction of giving one's authority away. Can you speak in, let's drill down on that idea? Because I think everything falls into this. When we talk about the world being upside down, this is the moment at which it went upside down. And it was based on authority given away. And I have to add this to it. There's so many other stories about birthrights. There's so many stories about somebody grabbing another guy's heel or stealing this thing, or this was mine. And there's so many stories about people trying to get into and be a part of the thing that God gave us. Because it seems like in the fallen world that we live in, there are those who are jealous of our lordship and of our authority and of who we've made to be. Because you've said to me many times, you said, it's almost like we've forgotten who we are. Is that in him, if you think about this, no, you, when things are right side up, when it's very good, you are my son. You are an extension of me. You are created in my image, and I'm going to conform you to my likeness, bro. And I'm like, that's all I want to do. That's all I want to do, because I know that you got everything else handled. I don't have to kick down a door. You open them, but I have to be in alignment with you. So will you drill down again, and maybe you repeat yourself, but on this moment, because I've just so cursively talked about the fall of man. But what you're saying is very specific, and I think it informs everything else that I read in Scripture.
Yeah. We could probably spend the rest of this session on that question. So
yeah,
there are a lot of elements that kind of feed into it. So Lord, thanks for giving us the ability to communicate this with some clarity, right? And
right.
Because it's such a huge question.
Right.
Let's begin with this. Why did the serpent wait until after Adam named all the animals before he showed up? Why did he do that? Why didn't he just name them?
Right.
Why did he wait? Okay, so now let's go back. So let's deal with this naming rights issue again by refresher. Naming rights is it basically says this: the one who names or the one who accepts the name is subordinate to the one who gives the name. So we know this. About in our own families. When we were first talking about this, and this is where by reminder. Well, Matt, who named your children?
Yeah, I did. Yeah? My wife did.
You and your wife did. Okay, so who has authority over your children?
We do.
Yeah.
It's
Do
clear.
I have authority over your children?
No.
Does anybody else on the, that including your parents, have authority over those children?
No.
Why? Because you named them. See, that's the simplicity of the idea of naming rights. So, second part of that is Solomon made this really interesting statement in Proverbs. He said, as a person thinks, so are they. So The way I think is the way that I am. So if you wanted to control me, what is the first thing you would attack?
How you think?
How you
Perspective.
think.
Yeah.
Okay. Guess what? I have just described the conflict between heaven and hell.
Wow.
It's no more complicated than that right there.
Say it again.
As a man thinks, as a person thinks, so are they. So if you're going to attack particularly someone who has less authority than you, then guess what you're going to do? You're going to attack the way they think, because the way they think is the way they are. Now, by the way, that is happening right now. This may seem
Oh,
like
yeah.
divergence, but I'm going to come back and bring it very practical in our real life experience today. How naming rights is working right now. And we don't even know it.
Yeah.
We're getting ourselves to it, thinking it's right.
Yep.
How many times have you heard how people declare, people appeal, people, in the news, politicians, all of that, that we need our constitutional rights protected? Now think about that for just a second. We are appealing to the Constitution to protect our rights. What then becomes superior? What is superior in that exchange?
Constitution.
The Constitution. Well, guess what? That is a naming right. We have just named the Constitution as being superior to us.
That makes total sense.
Okay. Now, guess what? That is a redefinition. That is a turning upside down of what that Constitution does. That Constitution does not delineate our rights. What it does is it delineates the limitations that we, as the superiors to the Constitution, have decreed that the government that represents us will abide and operate within.
Wow.
It is not conferring rights to us. It is limiting the authority of government.
Yep.
But see what happens? The moment we appeal for our rights, we have become subordinate to the Constitution.
Bam.
See? And guess who's now given oath to abide the Constitution? Our politicians.
Yeah.
And they say, okay, we'll do that. We will rule you through our interpretation of the Constitution. Wait a minute. Whoa, time out. That's not how this works. Now, let's look, and I don't want to get political, but I want to give very, very practical ways that this is operating even today. It's easy to talk about how it looked in the garden, but let's see how the garden is actually functioning today. So at the end of the election, the last federal election, presidential election, there is this big move by a huge mass of the population demanding a recount, an examination of the votes. They're now in the Congress is now in session. Mike Pence is being appealed to hold back the counting, this whole affirmation of the election. And he says, I cannot do that. His position was, I cannot do that because I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. And the Constitution does not give me authority to do that. Wow, how right that sounds. Wait a minute. You are appealing to upholding the Constitution, but the Constitution has a higher authority. And the higher authority are the people. And a sizable portion of the people are now demanding an examination of the election, which is now we're into God-given, which is their God-given authority to require. Well, Mike appealed to the Constitution as the authority over the people instead of seeing the people as being an authority over the Constitution.
Folks, we could just continue that whole segment if you want to. The link is in the description. I didn't even intend to go that far, and I got caught up in that. How amazing. And there's so many topics, 37 episodes with Steve Staggs. And folks, I'm just, every time, and I've listened to that. I did it with him, and then I've listened to it multiple times. It's like a multifaceted diamond, right? You literally, it catches the light and you turn it and you're like, you see something new. But these are fundamental things that Steve is talking about, right? Starting out with this whole idea of, hey, why did God create, right? And this idea of, well, how do I hear from him? I mean, Terrence's question is like the question of all of us. I asked that same exact question. Well, how do I know that it's Jesus I'm listening to? And Steve said something really great to me. He said, Matt, what's your intent? And it's interesting, this declaration that he talked about, this idea of saying, Jesus, only you have the authority to speak to me. And so what is amazing about that is I think a lot of people, believe what was talked about in the Usual Suspects, right? The greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince man that he didn't exist. And most people don't. They're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's we're in this kind of age of reason. There's no like spiritual realm. There's no demons trying to speak." But take a look at even the stories in the Bible. Literally, legion, more than one demon, right? In a man recognizes who Jesus is, and then he's like, "Don't send us down there. Send us into the pigs." They recognize this. This is not the battle. Is not between flesh and blood. And all of this idea of the upside down world turned right side up is really built around this concept of authority. And the more I spent time with Steve, the more and more I saw. And now I see it almost everywhere I turn, is that people will use things. And he used this last example of the Constitution. It seems like that's a good argument. Well, what should have happened? Right? We formed this thing, this more perfect union. And if you think about it, because we didn't live in 1776 and we didn't have revolution, and most of us, for me, you grow up in the 80s and things were fine. And now you get to this period of time, this crisis era, and you're like, hold on a second, who does have the authority? Right? And you think about all like new nations. Well, who people, right? The consent of the governed. Like that's the beauty of the American, system, is that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with inalienable rights. These rights don't come from government, they come from the creator himself. And so then we want to form a more perfect union. We say, hey, let's write this thing, put checks and balances on it, because we understand that there is evil in the world, and we understand that we're going to have disagreements, and let's set up a better system that we can. But if we find it to be prudent, we may have to cast these things off or change them. And there's a process by which you do that. But this idea that we come underneath the Constitution, which I think is interesting, it's being used against us. We have authority over it. I've dealt with this with Texas independence so much. People that would argue with me, and they're like, "Oh yeah, the Supreme Court will never let you do that." I was like, "Who's the Supreme Court?" The Supreme Court is like, that was created by us. And if there's a point in which we want to create another system, we can do that, because our rights come from God. They don't come from the governor. They don't come from the president. They come from a document. They come from God. And I think more and more people are waking up to this and seeing this. But this is at the core, this idea of authority. And so it was so cool that Steve is saying, hey, look what happened in the garden, and then look what happens every single day, right? People rename you. You're the deplorables, right? Right? Those are the names that people give you. And what's interesting is they're defining you, redefining you, and using terms that basically, because you have like an emergency brake on your life because you've got values, you're like, well, maybe I am a bad person. And they use these things to rename you, right? Whatever it is, insert the terrible word that they would call you, racist or whatever it is. And you're like, hold on a second, no, I'm not. Or am I? Right? And it's this lie that continues to be told to us. So you go back to the garden and you think about this transaction, right? And I think one of the things that blew my mind the most when I started talking with Steve was this idea is, hon, you're telling me that God is, omnipresent. You're telling me that he is sovereign over all things, that he's the only one outside of this system and time. You're telling me he's like knows everything, but somehow he got tricked. And that's really how it's presented. It's like, oh yeah, this fall of man was just like, oh, we screwed it up. Hang on a second. If it's true that God is sovereign over all things, then it was actually his very intent. Because here's the thing. Remember when they kicked him out of the garden, there were flaming swords? Well, what's the point of having flaming swords? So you can't get back in. But what's interesting is, what did the serpent say? Right? Surely he did not say that. He lied. Right? And had to do that in order to get authority and power. And we live in this world that's literally, who's the king? The king of the air. This upside down world is run by Satan and his minions, right? This idea of we've given this authority away. And what's amazing is, how does this get undone? And that's this whole thing and what it's all about. If I can convince you that Jesus is dead, right? If I can convince you that he doesn't speak, and that's what's really interesting, even within the church, just like, hey, come underneath the authority of the Constitution, is come under the authority of the Bible. By the way, the Bible's a book, and it's a testament to what God spoke. But basically, when we do that, when we say, yeah, I've got to come under the authority of the Bible, no, you got to come underneath the authority of a speaking, living Jesus. And when you recognize how, diametrically opposed those ideas are, they sound good. Yeah, I got to come up underneath the Constitution and defend it. No, 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 no. That is actually a part of the lie. The Bible is great. What does it say about itself? It's useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. But if I can convince you that Jesus is dead and doesn't speak, right, that you don't have literally this engagement directly, and you can't engage, well, how are you going to know how to discern? How are you going to be able to know that? And it says, literally, Romans 12:2, right? This idea that you would renew your mind, right? Do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you can test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Why would we renew our minds? Oh, as a man thinks, so he is. Oh, so how do we renew our minds? Oh, so, a lot of times the church says, well, just read your Bible because Jesus is dead. And it's interesting. And then they give a little bit of room for the Spirit of God. But folks, this is such a huge idea. But you realize we're in the cesspool, like Steve talked about. We're literally in the cesspool of lies. It's like, oh, how do I discern between lookalikes? And so we're back in the garden. And there are two trees. I'm sure there are more, but there are two trees in this story. They both look really good. They both have fruit that you can eat. But one is death and one is life. And what is Satan's whole thing? Surely he didn't say that. You surely won't die. And what was the advertising campaign by Satan himself? What was it? Hey, if you eat of this, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And what's interesting is if you only knew good at the time, you wouldn't know what death was. And instead of going to the boss and going, hold on a second, this crafty guy, the guy that's a speaking snake, is telling me that you didn't say this, but I heard you say this. You said that you could eat from any tree in the garden, just not this one. I remember you saying that. But what was the thing? And when we talk about sin, it's doing it apart from God. That's it. Everything is, right? I'm going to go, I got it from here. I'm going to go my own way. But I'm going to tell you, and this is like, I can't say this more clearly. If you want to have the journey of a lifetime, like literally, you were created for a purpose. You're not an accident. You're not the descendant of a monkey. You literally have purpose. He knows every hair on your head. He knit you together in his womb, in your mother's womb. He knows you. And you're like, how is that even possible? But that's the beauty of the whole thing. And when you connect with that and you recognize that you were created uniquely, and there's all kinds of things. And when you start engaging with it, and you're like, hey, I don't know how to hear from you. And this baby looking up and going, hey, I want to get to know you more. That's this beginning of this process. And what's amazing is Steve said, it becomes like breathing. And it's very, very simple. Because when you realize that literally Jesus goes before us, that he is the good shepherd, right? He knows us. And we recognize his voice and we follow him. Why do you say to them, hey, follow me? He's still saying that today. Follow me. And you know what? I think a lot of people come to know Jesus at the end of themselves, right? Prison, drugs, addiction, all kinds of things. Why? Because, man, I tried everything and it didn't satisfy. It didn't fulfill what I was looking for because you've been literally created for this. What did he say? He said, why did God create? God created so that his man would rule and reign with him in the fullness of his nature and character. And what is the whole idea? To bless and protect. God created his man so that he would rule and reign with him in the fullness of his nature and character. John 15:5 says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Guess where the fruit is? The fruit's on the branches, folks. That's you. But he says, without me, you can do nothing. Well, what is that without me thing? Is that read your Bible more? I'm not saying reading the Bible is a bad thing. It's incredible. But without this engagement with a speaking Jesus, without engaging with this thing, that's where the amazing, journey begins, exists, and ends. It's all in that. And I think that what's really sad about this is it's almost like in crypto, this concept of onboarding. You may have this in your business, or you've seen this if you in a software company or whatever. You get people to understand how to use your software, right? I got to onboard you. Well, the church has been doing that for a long time. But what Steve called it is he says it's this constant repetition of infancy. And what is an infant who drinks milk? It's a constant onboarding, which is great. But if you talk to anyone who's mature and has followed Jesus and listened to his voice, and of every, I don't care who it is. My grandmother said he's always been enough. Is that no? The Bible has always been enough. No, Jesus has always been enough, because he is the author and perfecter of the whole thing. All things were made for him and by him. And by extension, when we follow him, listen to his voice and follow him in real time, folks, in the present, not about knowing a bunch of Bible verses, you have a straight path. And he says, my peace I give to you. I do not give as the world gives. Well, isn't that what we're looking for? I was thinking about this. How many people have been rich and miserable? How many people have been, trying to stuff drugs or relationships or sex or anything into this thing to go, I just need to numb this pain. And he says, come to me. And you just go, and folks, what's amazing about it? Steve passed so suddenly, and Carter and I went through like the shock of that. And what's amazing is this thing is short. This thing is short. In fact, there would be folks in the Bible who lived like 1,000 years. He shortened it to 120 max. If you think about that, then if we're eternal, right? This is an eternal thing. And this is not eternal, right? This life is 120 years. What's amazing about it is it's kind of like boot camp. And you're getting this opportunity literally to go, hey, is this true? Don't listen to me. Don't listen to your pastor. Don't listen to Steve. Test it and see if it's true. Ask him yourself. And I had to say the very same thing. I'm like, how do I know it's you? Well, how do I do that? What's your intent? And who has authority to speak to you? And then when you start seeing that, then you realize there are a lot of things speaking to you. We've used the term open ports before, like a firewall in tech or routers, right? There are ports that you leave open for the internet, right? So that it can come and go. But there are other ports that sometimes have to be open for different things of communication coming in. But so many of us have all the ports open, right? It's like, I'm going to go do DMT, and whatever entity talks to me, I'm going to call that God. Be careful, folks. They're not all. And guess what? Satan was the most beautiful of all the angels. You think that they don't come with offering you things, power and everything? And the whole thing is about discernment between lookalikes. Hey, this one's promised me a lot and says a lot of really good things. The question is this you? Well, if I have authority and I'm literally, a son of God, right? This Elohim man that he talks about, and that literally we are created in his image. And this whole idea is to rule and reign with him in the fullness of his nature and character. Wow, our authority actually means something. Well, what's the battle for? The battle is for how you think in your authority. And that's what happened. But here's the craziest thing, which shocked me the most, is imagine that this is God's plan all along. Because how can you rule and reign with him in the fullness of his nature and character if you don't know the difference between good and evil? That's the one thing that just absolutely blew my mind. Wow. And then he gives you choice. And he respects that choice, right? Cain slew Abel. And that's what's so interesting. Now you get into things like, well, how can these bad things happen? How can, people shoot up schools? And Steve said to me, hey, every single tool is neutral until it is animated by a certain nature and character. And what do we call those folks? Oh, that's a sociopath or a psychopath or whatever. Well, it's a nature and character. Guns don't shoot people by themselves, and tables don't build themselves. And so this idea, what separates us from the animals is this creative ability that we have. And you're like, hold on, without me, you can do nothing. What does that mean then? With you, we can do anything. But we don't do anything on our own. We do it with you. And so these things are appointed. And you want to experience what it is really like to live. And then what's amazing is the things that you thought would bring you peace, you recognize are just tools to be animated for the purposes of the kingdom of God. Look they asked him how to pray. He said, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You're the most holy one. Your kingdom come. Well, if it has to come, it's not here right now. Your kingdom come. Your will be done. Not mine, yours. Where? On earth as it is in heaven. And so also on the earth, as Steve would say. Sounds like we got work to do. It sounds like God is saying, hey, you listening to me? Well, this place is upside down. And it's amazing when you start seeing it, and then you see it so clearly, and then you start recognizing and discerning between lookalikes. And then, folks, we're in very, very critical and interesting times. And I think a lot of people have to be shaken before they actually are paying attention. We're coming into a massively crisis era. And the question is, there's provision on both ends of this thing, right? Consider it pure joy when facing troubles of many kinds. What does that mean? And it made me think about David. We know the story of David and Goliath. But everybody was afraid when they saw this giant, except David. And what did David say? They put Saul's armor on him, right? They're like, hey, we're going to fix you up so you can handle this giant guy because you're willing to go in and we're terrified. And he says, get this stuff off of me. I fought the lion and the bear. And I want you to see yourself as David in this story. You have fought the lion and the bear. And let's just go back. Let's just go back to the lion. Let's say it's the time in your life when you fought the lion. Were you like, yippee, I'm fighting a lion? And what about the bear? Bears are you fought a bear. Was he in the midst of that going, this is joyful, I'm fighting a bear? No, you're like freaking out. What was that? Folks, it's called preparation. And you think about your whole life and you're like, why have I had a heart for this? Why have I had a certain facility for this? Why did I go through this? Why is this difficult time? Consider it pure joy when facing troubles of many kinds. Why? Because when you're following him, this is preparation for slaying the giant. And that was David's calling, right? Amongst many other things. But here's the other thing too. Not everyone is called to be like the king of Israel. But you are called to bless and protect where you are. You have authority. And we just keep giving it away to Satan, right? We give it away. And so when you think about this, we're coming into an era, and there's some people that I think are watching this who realize that Jesus has been speaking to you all your life. And you sensed a certain thing. You're like, I'm not meant for obscurity. There's got to be purpose in all of this. Why all of these experiences and why all these things? And why do you give me hope? And why is there a redemptive thread through this? He's preparing you. You fought the lion and the bear. And it's not just for one thing of slaying a giant, but it's like, no, if the eyes of the Lord search to and fro to find those whose hearts are completely his so that he may strengthen them, like, hello, I hope you see us. And it's that walking literally moment by moment. And Steve said to me, he's like, hey, we've forgotten how to think. And I'm like, can I think with Jesus? Folks, I'm doing it right now. It becomes like breathing. And then you just go, wow, so your yoke is easy and your burden is light. So this isn't like, I got to hop on one foot and do everything and keep things buttoned up and say the right things and be this certain way. No, folks, the stakes are much higher than that about, oh, you said a bad word, or no, folks, the battle is not between flesh and blood. But this is a great filter, folks. This is a great filter. And all I'm testifying to is my experience, and all Steve was testifying was his experience. But I'm going to tell you this. If you're convinced that Jesus is dead and does not speak, you're at a disadvantage, because I'm here to tell you he does. And if you're willing to look up at him into his eyes and say, hey, I don't know how this works, but I'm going to give you my authority. I'm going to say, only you have the authority to speak to me. And folks, I've said that so many times, but I always say right after it, Satan, you have no standing here. You have no authority. And what I love is Steve's like, and you dismiss him. Go away. And I never understood that stuff, right? I remember hearing people when I was younger talking about like rebuking Satan. That's kind of a churchy way of saying it. But no, it's a literal thing. There is evil, folks. And the question is, where are you going to give your authority? And so many of us, because we're so confused, we're just like, well, I'm kind of blown around by the wind. Well, wasn't there a story about that one? Folks, I'm trying to encourage you to do exactly what Steve did, because I learned it from him. Don't trust me. I'm just testifying to something that I've experienced. He was doing the same thing. There's many other people. But I think what we desire for is the connectedness to the very creation, to understand, why am I here? What's the whole point of this? And I'm going to tell you, you look out at the world, and the world's going to tell you you're an accident. Over billions and billions of years, these things bumped into each other. And next thing you know, you're doing, you're an auto mechanic or something. Folks, Jesus is alive and he speaks. I encourage you, if you want to hear more of this, the 69 episodes now, 37 of those were with Steve before he passed. They are just gold. But every single time he's like, Matt, ask him yourself. And that's what's so cool about it. And also now I want to actually give credence to this. I read my Bible, folks, and guess what ends up happening? I'm reminded of stuff. I don't know if you know this. It was like 1444 when the Gutenberg printing press printed these versions, and there's all kinds of translations, and there's a lot of, things that you try to communicate in the Greek and Hebrew and do not translate to English. And as you dive into these things, you recognize, hey, this is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. But if I'm going to discern between lookalikes, and I'm going to understand what is this like English version, and why is this different, and why did you say horses when it meant birds or chariots? Like, there's a lot of things you're just like, I need help in discerning these things. But we're listening to a lot of people. And I think that that's by design, right? There's a lot of charismatic teachers and speakers that are saying, follow me. No, we don't follow men. Follow the one in which all things were created for him and by him. And to know that that's true, and to see that in practical life. I literally, my buddy Jim is on this stream right now, and he and I had an experience last night that just defies explanation. And you just go, well, these are the things in which how God works. And there are appointed times. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to say this. Next Friday, we're going to talk about a really, really cool concept that that Steve shared with me. And I'm just excited because in a way I'm doing this for myself. Strangely, I want to encourage you, but it's like the discipline of doing this every week is so good for me, because I'm in a way reminding myself, and it's just the fruit it bears is unbelievable. But we're going to talk next week about chronology of time. We're going to talk about so that's the Chronos time, the Kairos time, right? Jesus's timing, and then where those things intersect, which is the fullness of time. And we're going to hear from Steve talk about that next week. Thank you for joining the Pulse, the Right Side Up, in honor of Steve Staggs on Friday the 13th. And I hope you have a great weekend, and bless you. thankful that you're here. If you want to go further and engage with, the folks in the community, we have a Telegram channel. It's in the description. You can join. I would encourage you, if you're like, hold on, what's this all about? There is a kind of quintessential paper. It's called the 1960s white paper that's pinned in the comments of that Telegram channel. And it's free. Just come in. Steve, this is like, I think everything that we talk about on this all kind of condensed into a seminal writing that is in the context of what he called the 1960s white paper. And if you're willing to read that, it'll blow your mind. But a lot of what we talk about here and all of the 37 episodes with Steve are really a derivative of that document. And it's really cool to see. But it's one man's journey with a living and speaking Jesus. And he's inviting you into that journey it's a journey of a lifetime. And that's why people talk about being a new creation in Christ. He renames you, folks. Take care of yourself and don't mess with Texas. Catch you next week.